Hello! Now we are ready for a real practice. For simplicity, I'm going to deal with just a single Cisco IOS router. I will start with two very simple tasks. At first, I will try to retrieve output from various show commands. Secondly, I will try to configure a router with a different hostname. As I have mentioned before, our scope for today is just a single router. First task will use IOS command module. Second task will use IOS config module. At the top of the screen you can see a link to Ansible's network module documentation. Let's take a look at it. Here we see a very long list of Ansible's network modules. You can use them to interact with different network equipment vendors. Even some standalone products, for example Cisco ACI, have their own modules. You can see that ACI actually has a lot of modules. These ones. But for now we are interested in a module called IOS command. Let's find it. Here it is, under IOS. Here we can see documentation for this module and usage examples. I encourage you to spend some time reading documentation for every module you wish to use. Documentation tells us what parameters we must or may provide to a module, what output will be generated by a module, and what are special requirements for a module if it has any. And be aware that modules implementation could be different in different Ansible's version. Know your Ansible's version. I will show you how to check it in a few seconds, and look at corresponding documentation. I am using Ansible 2.6. Here I use latest documentation, and you can see it here as well, Ansible 2.6. For now we will leave website and jump to our Ansible control machine. Let me show you that I'm running Ansible on Debian 9. And I'm using the latest Ansible version. To check Ansible version, you need to type Ansible ---- version. I'm using Ansible 2.6.3. Now let's jump back to our slides and figure out steps we need to take to finally make use of Ansible. So here we can see actual steps we need to take. At first, we need to ensure that we can SSH into our target host from Ansible control machine. Secondly, we need to ensure that account which we are using for SSH has enough privileges to execute desired CLI commands. So let's do that stuff. In our example, our router has an IP 10.10.30.1. So let's try to SSH into it. Here we can see that SSH works. Now let's try to execute some commands. And we see that all our commands work just fine. We can go to configuration mode and it still works. We can try to change hostname and it works as well. So we are done with first two steps. Then we need to create a directory for Ansible files and create actual files. Configuration file, which is ansible.cfg, inventory file, and finally playbook. When we are done with that, we can try to execute our playbook. So let's go step by step. Let's create a directory, create all required files, and finally we will try to execute our playbook. I will move to an empty slide in case we need to draw something. So let's jump back to our Linux machine. I already have a directory called lab1. Now I need to create three files. Configuration file, which is ansible.cfg, inventory file, and our playbook. Let's start with configuration file. It is pretty small, and actually I can make it even smaller, since host key checking policy is not a required argument. We can safely go with a default one, but for lab environment I prefer to set this variable to false. But this one, argument inventory, we need to set, and it equals to hosts, and we will be looking for this file in the same directory where ansible.cfg is. So let's create our inventory file, and we must name it hosts, since we are setting such file name here in our ansible.cfg. Basically, we have a relationship between our Ansible CFG and our inventory file. Here we have a group of devices called routers and one device inside this group, which is our router with IP 10.10.30.1 and our credentials for SSH. Username equals admin and password equals admin as well. Of course, if we use different type of authentication, for example PKI, we will need to change our inventory file and probably our playbooks and ansible.cfg accordingly. But for now we are using pretty simple authentication method. So now we are ready to create our playbook. At first, let's try to execute our playbook, and then I will explain you details inside that playbook. To execute it, we need to use command called Ansible playbook and use our playbook as an argument for that command. Here we see some debugging output. It tells us that Ansible first tries to execute first play, then it tries to execute first task, and then it tries to execute second task. And everything was good for us. So basically, here is output from our command. If we go back to our router and do the same, we can compare these two outputs. And conclude that actually we are good with our playbook. It works as desired. Now let's talk a little bit about what is inside our playbook. At first, I want to mention that Ansible playbook use YAML format. I don't want to dive into YAML specifics. I just want to mention that its structure is very similar to Python dictionaries. It uses key value pairs and nesting structure. So, for example, we have key, which is name, and value first play. We have a key hosts and a value routers. And for example, here we have some nesting. We have IOS command, key, and one more key value pair inside IOS command key. So let's go step by step. Name. This is a name of our play, and I've called it first play. Now we have hosts, and value of hosts equals to routers. It tells Ansible what hosts it will use when executing this play. It will use routers, and let's check it. Routers here, it is a group inside inventory file, and it contains just a single router. And our playbook is linked, not our playbook, our play, first play is linked to that group. So routers here is actually a routers group in our inventory file. Next, guess effects equals false. As I've mentioned in previous video, we can't run native Ansible fact gathering functionality, so we need to disable it. And connection equals local. We need to set it in a such manner, since iOS command module requires it. We can't use another type of connections with this module. Actually, we can use network CLI, but default one connection is SSH, and we cannot use SSH with iOS command module. I can show you. If we comment it out, and execute it one more time, it will fail. Connection type SSH is not valid for this module. So we need to use connection equals local. Next we have our tasks. First task has a name first task, and it uses iOS command module. And here is our command show version. It is an actual command which we want to execute on our router. And here we're registering results of this task to a variable called version. We needed to actually see some output from our playbook. And we do it in the next task. We're using debug module, and we are outputting results of a previous task. If we again comment it out, let's see what happens. So something happens, and actually Ansible will execute this command on the router, but we do not see any useful output. We do not see output of that command. In order to see this output, we have to use debug module and output results of a previous task. So let's run it one more time. And now, instead of this pretty small output, we have something like this. Basically, after first task, we have one more task, second task, and we have output. And inside std_out lines, and inside just std_out, just standard out, we see output of our command from Cisco iOS router. Let's summarize it one more time. Here we can see show retry. Ansible automatically generates such file if we have something wrong with our playbook. So if we have something wrong in our playbook and we try to execute it, Ansible will fail and it will generate show retry file. Let's delete it for now, since we don't really need it now. And we have our three files. Ansible CFG. Again, we have a link from Ansible CFG to our inventory file. Here, dot and backslash tells us to search for this file in the same directory. Here is our inventory file. We have a group called routers with just a single member, our router 1, with credentials. And here is our playbook, which consists of just a single play and two tasks. First task executes show version command, and second task gives us output from a first task. And we have some variables defined, not variables, some parameters defined. Here we tell our play to use routers group from inventory file. Again, these routers are linked to these routers in inventory file. We do not use gathering facts functionality, and we use connection type local. For our first task, from our slide side, I mean, that's all. So now let's try to configure router's hostname and create one more playbook and execute it. So let's jump back again to our Linux machine and create a new playbook which will configure our router with a different hostname. So here is our router console, and we see that it has hostname equals R1. Let's change it. To do so, we need to create again one more playbook. Let's copy our first playbook and change it a little. We do not have to change name of our play, scope, which is routers group, gathering facts functionality, type of connection. We just need to change our tasks a little bit. Name will be the same, but we need to change module. Instead of iOS command, we need to use iOS config. Again, you can see documentation for this module at Ansible website. And instead of commands parameter, we need to use lines. And obviously, instead of show version, we need to specify some configuration command. In our case, it will be hostname Ansible. Again, we will try to register output, and for clarity, we change version to hostname. Actually, we can type here anything we want. Let's try to name it var1. Here we can see again second task. Again, it is debug module, but here we need to change our output accordingly. We need to output results of var1. Basically, that's all. And we are ready to execute this playbook. Again, we will use Ansible playbook command and specify our playbook as an argument. Here we see results. And here we can actually check. And yeah, we see that our hostname has been changed. And here we can see again, we have our first play, our first task, and our second task. And from second task, we can see some useful output. We can see that something changed at our router. We can use commands which Ansible has executed, and updates as well. Let's try to run it one more time. And here we can see a difference. Here we see a change. Here we don't see any change. That is why our hostname is already Ansible. So if Ansible doesn't just execute your commands without any thinking, without thinking about it, without comparing with the current config. So if Ansible see that your hostname is already Ansible, it wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't execute this command, hostname Ansible, one more time, since it's just pointless. You already have correct hostname in place. That is why we don't see any change, and we don't see any commands being executed and any updates. And one more thing to mention, actually we can see it inside first tasks. When we ran our playbook first time, our first task changed our router. When we run it second time, we don't see any change, since again our hostname is already Ansible. If we change it to something different and run our playbook one more time, it will change it again. So at our first task we see that our router has been changed, and again we see commands which were executed. In our case it is just a single command, hostname Ansible. So basically that's all. Let's summarize it one more time. We have two configuration. We have one configuration file, we have one inventory file, and two playbooks. Again, here is our configuration file, which has a link to inventory and host key checking policy disabled. We have our inventory file, which contains one group with just a single member. We have our playbook, which outputs show version, and we have one more playbook which configures our router with the hostname Ansible. Actually, in our slide we see that we wanted to retrieve output from various show commands. So let's try to output one more command. Let's again copy our show YAML to, for example, clock YAML. Change it a little bit again, and here instead of show version we will try to output we will try to get output from show clock. For clarity, we change our variable name to clock, and here we need to do it as well. Let's run this playbook, and we see output from show clock command, which is pretty short and pretty obvious. So I think this first step we are done, and we are ready to move forward to some more advanced Ansible features. And I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.